At the beginning of the story, we're introduced to a man named David, who is sitting in his house painting. Outside, a violent storm is raging, with heavy rain and strong winds. The weather gets so bad that, for safety, David takes his entire family down into the basement to wait it out. The next morning, once the storm has finally calmed, David and his family come out of the basement to check the damage. What they see leaves them shocked. A massive tree has fallen right onto their window. Because of this, the painting David was working on has been completely destroyed. A little later, David and his wife are discussing the situation when their son Billy suddenly runs up to them and insists they come with him. He says he has something important to show them. Curious, they follow him, only to discover that an enormous tree has also crashed onto their boathouse. After seeing all this destruction, David tells his wife that he's going over to their neighbor Brenton's house to get some information about insurance. He figures that if they understand the policy, they might be able to file a claim for the damages. With that in mind, David heads to Brenton's place. When he arrives, he's even more surprised to see that the storm has caused serious damage there as well. Still, he brushes it off and asks Brenton about the insurance details. As it turns out, Brenton is a lawyer, so he's well informed about these matters. After listening to David, Brenton tells him he'll gather all the insurance information and share it with him shortly. Then Brenton asks if David is planning to go to the supermarket. David says yes, since he and Billy were already thinking about going. He invites Brenton to join them, and Brenton agrees. Soon, the three of them set off together toward the supermarket. On their way, they notice several military trucks speeding toward the mountains. The sight feels strange and unsettling. Such a large military presence can only mean something serious is happening. Seeing this triggers a memory for Brenton, reminding him of an old story told by an elderly woman in town. According to the legend, a UFO once crashed somewhere near those very mountains. It was said that some scientists were secretly conducting experiments on UFOs and aliens found in that area. However, this story was only told by an old lady, so most people in the town just considered it a joke. A little while later, they arrived near the supermarket. But as soon as they got there, David realized there was no signal on his phone at all. So, he sent his son Billy inside with Brenton. After that, David tried to call his wife using the public phone outside the supermarket. But that phone wasn't working either. Seeing this, David understood there was no point wasting time standing there. He decided to quickly finish what they needed and leave as soon as possible. With that in mind, he also went inside the supermarket. At that time, the supermarket was quite crowded. David's good friend Ollie, who worked at the store, was also there. David went back to his son Billy while Brenton started gathering the necessary supplies. Since it was a small town, David was already familiar with most of the employees and many of the customers. Billy's school teacher, Mrs. Reardon, was also there shopping. But suddenly, 3 military soldiers entered the supermarket. They looked extremely tense and frightened, almost as if they were trying to hide inside under the excuse of shopping. Just then, a military police officer arrived and told them they had to reach the mountains within 5 minutes. At the same time, emergency sirens started blaring throughout the entire town. Suddenly, a man named Dan came running into the supermarket. His face was covered in blood, and he looked absolutely terrified. Breathing heavily, he warned everyone that something horrifying was hiding in the mist, a creature that had attacked his friend and dragged him straight into it. Hearing this, panic spread among the people inside. Just then, one man gathered the courage to run outside toward his car, but by now, a thick mist had already covered the entire area. The moment he stepped into it, he vanished within seconds. People were still trying to understand what was happening outside, when suddenly, a loud and horrifying scream echoed from the mist. As soon as they heard it, everyone inside the supermarket rushed to shut the doors in fear. But right then, a powerful tremor, almost like an earthquake, shook the entire building so violently that it became hard to even stand. People dropped to the ground in panic. David held his son Billy tightly in his arms, struggling to keep his balance. Just a few moments later, everything suddenly went quiet. But no one could understand what was actually happening outside. Some people thought it was an earthquake, while others believed there might have been a massive explosion inside the mist. A woman named Carmody, however, claimed it was Judgment Day. She insisted that God was punishing humans for their sins. Just then, the store manager told everyone to stay inside until the mist cleared. But one woman in the store refused to listen. She was desperate to get home, worried sick about her children whom she had left alone. People tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen to anyone and eventually walked out of the supermarket. After some time passed, the thick mist outside still hadn't cleared. Everyone inside the store sat there, filled with fear and anxiety. Meanwhile, David was sitting in a corner with his son Billy, Billy's teacher Irene, and a few others. They all sat silently, thinking about what might be happening outside. During this, Irene introduced David to Amanda, a new school teacher who had recently moved to the town. She looked just as scared and shaken as everyone else. Just then, the store's assistant manager, Ollie, came over and asked if Billy was okay. David then asked him for a blanket for his son. Ollie told him that blankets could be found in the back area of the store, near the loading dock. Hearing this, David left Billy with Irene for a while and headed toward the loading dock. When he got there, he noticed the generator was overheating and giving off smoke, so he quickly shut it down to prevent any major accidents. But suddenly, something slammed hard against the shutter door from outside. This terrified David even more, and he rushed back to warn everyone. A few people came over, and it was discovered that the generator had stopped working and needed to be fixed. However, fixing it would require going outside, which was extremely risky. At that point, a man named Norman volunteered to go out and repair it, but David stopped him, warning that no one knew what was out there, and going outside at a time like this would be a terrible idea. Jim started arguing with him and angrily said they knew how to do their job and David should stay out of it. Then, Norman slightly opened the door and said there was nothing outside. But suddenly, long tentacles shot out of the mist and grabbed him, starting to drag him away. David tried his best to save him, but the tentacles tore through his skin and pulled him into the mist, killing him on the spot. Seeing this horrifying scene, everyone became even more terrified and immediately shut the door. But one tentacle was still inside. David quickly chopped it off with an iron rod, and it writhed in pain before sliding back out. After that, Jim came to David and started apologizing. But David was furious. He punched him and said that because of his stubbornness, a man had lost his life, and it was his fault. Just then, Ollie stepped in and tried to calm him down. Now the biggest problem was how to tell the others. Explaining something this terrifying wasn't easy, and they weren't even sure if anyone would believe them. At that moment, they saw Brent, and David tried to explain everything to him. But Brent didn't believe a word. He thought they were joking. This quickly turned into an argument, and the situation started escalating into a fight. Just then, the manager arrived. He listened to everything and got angry too. But when they showed him proof, the severed tentacle, he was shocked. That's when he finally believed that something dangerous was hiding in the mist. He went outside and told everyone the truth, which caused even more fear and chaos among the people. Then the scene shifted to Mrs. Carmody, who started crying in fear, calling it God's punishment and trying to prove herself right. Around the same time, Amanda came and tried to calm her down, but she arrogantly refused. Meanwhile, Brent still refused to believe anything. Slowly, the people split into 3 groups. Some believed it was an alien attack, some were still in denial, and others thought it was God's wrath. Mrs. Carmody began scaring everyone even more, manipulating people with her words. Hearing her, Jim got really angry and felt she was talking nonsense. But Mrs. Carmody wasn't going to stop. She declared that Norm's death was just the beginning, and if people still didn't understand, everyone would die. Hearing this, Amanda stepped forward and, in a burst of anger, slapped Mrs. Carmody hard across the face. The impact silenced her for a moment, and everyone standing there was left completely stunned. Meanwhile, Billy, terrified, ran over to the military soldiers and begged them to take everyone to a safe place so they could escape the danger. But the soldiers' phones weren't working either. Just then, David arrived and calmed Billy down. After that, people began discussing what they would do if the monsters made their way inside. They decided to gather weapons so they could defend themselves and stay alive if things got worse. Amanda then revealed that she had a gun with 12 bullets, but she didn't have much experience using it. That's when Ollie stepped in and said he could handle the gun, since he had once been a state shooting champion. On the other hand, Brenton and a few others were fed up with all the waiting. They felt like staying inside the store was pointless, so they decided to leave and head back to their homes. Seeing this, David tried to stop them, warning that going outside could be extremely dangerous. No one knew what was hiding in the mist. But when they refused to listen, David handed Brenton a rope. He suggested that if he really wanted to go out, he should tie the rope around his waist and walk up to 300 feet. If he made it safely, he could cut the rope. This way, the people inside would know whether it was safe or not. However, Brenton flat out refused this idea too. Just then, another man stepped forward and volunteered to do it. He said he had a shotgun in his car that could be useful for everyone, so he was willing to go out with the rope tied around him. He tied the rope around his waist and stepped outside with Brenton. Within seconds, they disappeared into the thick mist. The people inside held tightly onto the rope, when suddenly it started being pulled violently. 5 men grabbed it, struggling to hold it in place, but the rope kept getting pulled forward non-stop. Then suddenly, it went slack. When people pulled it back, they saw it was soaked in blood, and only the man's severed legs came back with it. Seeing this, everyone was completely terrified and immediately shut the store's door. Just then, Mrs. Carmody stepped forward and said that now everyone must finally believe this was God's wrath, and everything happening outside was punishment for human sins. As fear and tension filled the air, night slowly began to fall. The thick mist still covered everything outside, so people started arranging lights and other supplies inside the supermarket. But suddenly, a massive insect slammed into the glass and clung to it. People were already scared, and then several more giant insects appeared, sticking to the glass as well. No one had ever seen creatures that big in their lives. Then, out of nowhere, some flying creatures arrived and began snatching those insects and devouring them. In reality, all these creatures were drawn in by the store's bright lights, but no one inside understood that. Instead, they believed more light meant more safety, so they turned on even more lights, attracting even more of those creatures toward the store. As people watched in shock, the creatures suddenly smashed through the glass and started entering the supermarket. The moment they got inside, they launched vicious attacks on everyone, throwing the entire place into chaos. During the panic, David quickly lit a fire, trying to scare them off and fight back. But in the chaos, one man's clothes caught fire. He screamed in agony while others desperately tried to put the flames out. Meanwhile, another creature lunged toward a woman, about to attack her, but just in time, Ollie shot it dead. After a fierce struggle, the group somehow managed to drive the creatures away and tried to seal the broken glass again so nothing else could get inside. After this attack, the atmosphere inside the supermarket became even more horrifying and hopeless. Fear was clearly visible on everyone's faces. But then some people noticed Joe, the man whose clothes had caught fire. His body was horribly burned, and he was writhing in unbearable pain. He kept begging the others to give him a gun so he could shoot himself and escape the agony. Seeing this, David realized that if they didn't act fast, Joe wouldn't survive much longer. So he called Ollie and a few others over and told them that Joe's condition was critical. If they wanted any chance of saving him, they needed painkillers and essential medicines immediately. That meant going to the pharmacy right next to the supermarket. Just then, Billy grabbed David's hand and, terrified, begged him not to go outside. He was scared that the monsters lurking in the mist would kill him. David gently reassured his son, promising he'd be back soon. He left Billy with Amanda and handed her his car keys, telling her that if he didn't return, she should take Billy and find somewhere safe. With that, David and his group prepared to step outside. But before they could leave, Mrs. Carmody showed up and tried to stop them. She insisted that going outside was against God's will, and that they would all die if they did. Suddenly, the elderly teacher Irene stepped forward, furious. She grabbed an object and struck Mrs. Carmody, silencing her. Then, Irene decided to join David's group on the trip to the pharmacy. Carefully, David, Ali, Irene, and the others opened the supermarket doors and stepped out into the unknown. Luckily, they didn't see any monsters at first, but a thick, eerie mist surrounded them. Moving cautiously, they eventually reached the pharmacy. Inside, everyone rushed to gather medicines and painkillers. They managed to find what they needed and were about to leave when a strange noise echoed from deeper inside the store. As they followed the sound, they discovered a horrifying sight: massive spider webs covering the entire room, with several human corpses trapped inside. But one man was still alive. David and the others tried to save him, but it was already too late. The spiders had laid eggs inside his body. Suddenly, gigantic, terrifying spiders appeared and attacked them. Their webs were like burning acid, capable of melting flesh. During the chaos, one man's leg was severed completely. At that moment, the eggs inside the trapped man's body began to hatch, and thousands of tiny spiders burst out of him. The sight was so horrifying that everyone panicked. Still, they fought back and somehow managed to escape, running through the mist while avoiding the attacking spiders. Many of them didn't make it, but the survivors barely managed to return to the supermarket alive. Another night passed, but things inside the store had changed. Mrs. Carmody had already manipulated more than half the people with her blind faith. Even the mechanic who once trusted David had now lost hope and joined her side. Seeing this, David and his group realized that staying in the store was becoming just as dangerous as going outside. Then suddenly, David remembered something. At the pharmacy, a military police officer had said that all of this was their fault, and had even apologized. Now, David began to suspect that the military might be responsible for everything happening, and the only ones who could confirm the truth were the soldiers inside the store. With that in mind, David approached a lone soldier sitting quietly and asked if he knew what was really going on. But the soldier hesitated and said no. With this, the story ends here. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Also subscribe to this channel for more stories like this.